Ukraine accuses Moscow of stealing grain as a Russian-flagged cargo ship sets off with a cargo of seed.
Russian state media says two British men, Dylan Healy and Andrew Hill, have been charged with mercenary activities in eastern Ukraine.
And UNESCO places the Ukrainian version of borscht on its list of threatened cultural heritage, but Moscow's not happy about it.
First this hour, Russia has shown it's determined to assert control over Ukraine's Black Sea coast, despite Moscow's decision to withdraw from the much fought over Snake Island. Missiles have hit the port of Odessa, where at least 19 people have died. Before they were effectively blockaded, the Black Sea ports were used to export Russian grain. Now Kyiv has accused Moscow of stealing that grain, and it says this Russian-flagged cargo ship has left the Russian-occupied port of Berdyansk with a cargo of seed. Our correspondent Joe Inwood has the latest.
Today we had another attack, once again using these old Soviet-era missiles which hit a resort town just to the west of Odessa. It was a 9-story apartment block that was hit, as well as a holiday complex. A 12-year-old boy is amongst the dead. Now, what's interesting about the Odessa attack today is it happened maybe 12 hours after the Russians had been pushed off an island called Snake Island in the Black Sea. Now, that is both strategically and symbolically important in this war. At the start of the conflict, at the start of the invasion, it became iconic in many ways because the defenders, the border guards there, told the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, the Moskva, to go away in no uncertain and somewhat unbroadcastable terms, and they became heroes of this country's resistance. And their image appears on flags and on posters. The Moskva was subsequently sunk. So retaking this island, driving the Russians off, was a really important moment for the Ukrainians. They did it with sustained artillery barrages and have released images of that happening. Now, the Russians have a different version of events. They say they voluntarily left in order to facilitate the passage of grain into the rest of the world via the Black Sea to help the United Nations in their plans to get it out. The reason that's important is because grain is a massive agricultural export from Ukraine, and at the moment loads of it is stuck in the ports, in the warehouses around Odessa. And so getting it out to the world, specifically to the developing world, where normally it would be sold, is a really, really important challenge, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole world.
Well, as Joe Inwood was just saying there, Russia has been accused of stealing grain from areas of Ukraine that it controls. Moscow denies the allegations. The BBC has been monitoring the Russian-flagged vessel on its route from the Ukrainian port of Berdyansk to the Turkish port of Karasu. Well, earlier I spoke to BBC Reality Check's Daniele Palumbo, and he explained what's happening with Ukrainian grain.
There is an amount of grain that at the moment is stuck in Odessa. It can be shipped out because the Odessa port is actually mined, so it will be a safety concern to be taken out. However, a big part of Ukrainian grain is actually produced in the southern and eastern region, Luhansk, Donbas, Zaporizhia and Kherson region as well. During our investigation, we actually have spoken with over 200 farmers. Some of them were able to speak to us, and they explain how the Russians have their own tactics to steal this grain or to essentially pay them for an insignificant amount and take this grain away.
I see. And so what else did you find in your investigation?
Well, we have been using satellite image, open source intelligence tools to actually trace this grain out of this area to the south, to Crimea, and actually what was happening to the grain itself. We also analyzed tracking data from GPS devices, and we were able to see a huge column of trucks driving south towards the border with Crimea, especially to the border crossing of Armias and Sonar, going to a city of Zankoy in Crimea, where then it was transported via railway to Sevastopol or via truck as well to the Crimean bridge, and then inside Russia, so to Krasnodar and Rostov-on-Don. The grain itself was also mixed sometimes with Russian grain, and we have satellite images proving the movement of these cargoes until the different ports.
Fascinating stuff. And you've tracked a single shipment as well. Can you talk us through that?
Yes, we working closely with our sources in Ukraine. We were able to identify one specific vessel, that is the Zaboxoloi. This vessel departed Berdyansk on the 29th after a period where they switch off the GPS and switch on the GPS. This is actually a really unusual strategy for some of these bulk cargo vessels. The Russian administration there in Berdyansk actually said on a telegram message that this cargo vessel was going to carry 7,000 tons of grain out to friendly countries. We've been able to track the GPS data, and now this vessel is actually 2 nautical miles off the city of Karasu in North Turkey. This is now of particular interest because this afternoon the General Prosecutor Office of the Ukrainian government has asked for the Turkish government to actually arrest and stop the unloading, the possible unloading of this grain, which of course come from a Russian occupied territory, but of course we don't know where it come from, really.
The United Nations cultural arm UNESCO has added the cooking of Ukraine's version of borscht to its list of endangered traditions, describing the beetroot-based soup as part of the fabric of Ukrainian society and heritage. The decision was fast-tracked following the Russian invasion of the country. The Kremlin has reacted angrily to the move, as Danny Eberhard reports.
The real battle is being fought with bombs and bullets, but there's also a minor skirmish over borscht. On Twitter, Ukraine's Minister of Culture declared victory in what he called the Borscht War. His sentiments were echoed by this diner at a restaurant in Kiev.
They have always been saying that borscht is their national dish. That's why I think that recognition, which was made in France, is our victory.
This richly coloured beetroot-based soup, normally topped with sour cream, has prompted some tart exchanges between Ukraine and Russia. It's central to the cuisines of both nations, but has become embroiled in a wider struggle for identity. One famous Ukrainian chef, Yevgen Klopotenko, told the BBC it was to Ukrainians what pizza and pasta are to Italians, a feeling only accentuated by the war.
In the wartime, it started to be not only our main dish, it started to be some part of our souls. And every refugee who now is coming to my bistro, I'm giving them borscht because I wanted them feel like in a safety, feel like at home. The taste of borscht is the taste of the family.
The UNESCO decision got a mixed response from these residents of Moscow.
Certainly, borscht is part of the legacy of both Russia and Ukraine, but I think it's an explicit symbol of Ukraine, especially the version with a pampushka savoury bun and garlic.
I think UNESCO took the right decision because Ukrainian borscht with a pampushka savoury bun and lard is a brand. But I also make borscht, and it turns out well, I've got to admit.
Borscht has no nationality, just like bread, potatoes, cabbage. Is it national? What nationality can it have?
But the row has prompted sharper comments from the authorities in Moscow. The spokeswoman for Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, accused Ukraine of nationalism, saying borscht originated as a dish of Russian inhabitants of Kiev. So it is that a humble beetroot soup, traditionally a symbol of hospitality, has become a further stain on relations. Danny Eberhard, BBC News.
Russian state media is reporting that 2 British men have been charged with what it describes mercenary activities by Moscow-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine.
Dylan Healy is said to have been helping as a volunteer aid worker when he was taken prisoner in April. Russia says Andrew Hill, who's from Plymouth, surrendered to their forces in the same month. The Foreign Office said it condemns the exploitation of prisoners of war and civilians for political purposes. So we're getting a little information about what's happened, but initially, of course, these reports have come from Russian state media about the charges. Well, what picture is emerging?
So this has come from the TASS news agency. That is a big Moscow news agency backed by the Kremlin. And in general, their description, their reports of what's going on inside the Donetsk People's Republic have borne out in the long run. What we understand of this process is that the two men, so Andrew Hill was captured, he was fighting, as you say, with Ukrainian forces. Dylan Healy is very different. He was going as an aid worker on a sort of humanitarian mission, we understand, and was captured in that process. Now, both men are said to be being charged with being mercenaries. Now, the reason that is particularly concerning is because the last time people were charged with that offence, they were two British men, Sean Pinner and Aidan Aslan, and Brahim Saudoun, a Moroccan man. They were found guilty after a very short trial. In fact, they pleaded guilty and received the death penalty. So that's the real concern now, that these two men could be facing a similar fate to those other three. The small glimmer of hope, though, I guess, is that this could be part of some negotiating tactic. It's been suggested that what the Kremlin is trying to do here, by endangering their lives, putting them in this terrible position, is to increase their value in some sort of subsequent prisoner swap. And I guess that will be the small glimmer of hope for these men's families.